Peter's shadow heals the sick in the early days of the church. After Jesus had risen and ascended into heaven, the apostles continued his work in Jerusalem. Peter, one of Jesus' closest followers, was known not only for his bold preaching, but also for the many miracles that took place through him. One particularly striking example was how even Peter's shadow brought healing to the sick. Every day, as Peter walked through the busy streets of Jerusalem, a large crowd would follow him. People who were suffering from various illnesses and afflictions would come out of their homes, lying on beds, mats, and even on the dusty ground. They had heard of the great miracles performed by the apostles and believed that even a simple touch of Peter's shadow could bring healing. It was as if the presence of Peter carried the power of God, so much so that his mere shadow was enough to work a miracle. Imagine the scene. Peter, unaware of the effect his passing had on so many lives, would walk along the streets while people placed themselves in his path. Some lay on the sidewalks, hoping that when Peter's figure passed overhead, the shadow that fell upon them would cure their sickness. Others gathered near doorways and windows, eagerly watching for any sign of healing. The atmosphere was filled with both hope and quiet anticipation, as the crowd trusted that God was still working powerfully through his chosen servants. This unusual form of healing was not because Peter himself had any magical power. Instead, it was a clear sign that the power of God was at work. The healing was a demonstration of God's grace and compassion. It showed that even when Peter was simply going about his day, God's miraculous power was so present that it could extend to anyone in need. This event reminded everyone that the blessings of God could come in many unexpected ways, sometimes even through a simple shadow. The story of Peter's shadow healing the sick is impressive because it teaches us several important lessons. First, it reminds us that God's power is not limited by our human actions or appearances. Even something as ordinary as a shadow could be used by God to bring comfort and healing. Second, it highlights the strong faith of the people. They believed so deeply in the work of God that they trusted that even a small part of Peter, his shadow, could be a channel for divine healing. This trust is a powerful message for all who seek hope in difficult times. Finally, this event encourages believers to remember that God's miracles often work in ways that we might not expect. It wasn't just a matter of physical healing, it was a reminder that God is always present, even in the simplest parts of our lives. The healing through Peter's shadow shows that God's love and mercy can reach us in many forms, whether through a touching sermon, a kind word, or even a moment when a shadow passes over us and brings relief. In summary, the story of Peter's shadow healing the sick is a beautiful example of God's mysterious and powerful presence. It tells us that miracles are not always dramatic in the way we expect, but they are powerful signs of God's continuous work among his people. The healing that occurred simply by the shadow of an apostle reminds us to have faith, trust in God's timing, and always be open to his grace in our everyday lives.